In preparation for House of the Dragon Season 2, I'm going to give you guys an overview of Team Green versus Team Black. We'll go over some pros and cons for each side and get into some of the leaks for next season as well. This video can be a resource for different arguments depending on which side you're on, so share it with your friends. Alright, let's start with Team Black. Morally speaking, many people would argue that Team Black has an advantage. The characters on Team Black aren't framed as villains to the same extent as the Greens are. Rhaenyra is kind of given a feminist, girl boss angle, which is framed to be morally correct. One of the biggest arguments against Rhaenyra's ruling is that she is a woman. And in universe, this seems pretty valid. From our Martin point of view, this seems wrong, which is why I'm guessing most people are Team Black fans. Not to mention Rhaenyra is the main POV, which means her actions are pretty much always going to be framed in a more positive light. Of course, Rhae isn't perfect, but we'll get into that when we talk about the Greens. This morality argument extends to Luke and Jace, who are seen as two of the most pure characters in the show. Even next to Helena, they seem to be pretty good people. Jace wants to learn High Valyrian to support his role, and Luke genuinely doesn't want his family to die so that he could gain power.
King should honor the traditions of his forebears.
Luke also shows apprehension towards ruling, which is a refreshing trait from everyone else in the show, because most of them just act entitled towards their birthrights. Of course, Aegon is also an exception to this, but the difference between him is that he more so denies ruling because he's scared more than anything else, and just doesn't want to accept responsibility. Luke and Jace are most definitely bastards, but some people act as if it's their fault. Now, in the world of House of the Dragon, them being bastards is extremely relevant, but it shouldn't be. The whole downside of being a bastard is purely based on the society's backwards views on sex and marriage. It is simply unjustified. There's also the fact that Aemon is responsible for Luke's death, which was highly irresponsible. Aemon is completely responsible for this death, as well since he actively chased and cornered Luke with Vhagar. This is obviously the wrong choice to make for Aemon, because he instantly regrets it, and it jumpstarts a war which will pull in thousands of other people that had nothing to do with the conflict. Now let's get into another reason to support Team Black. You can definitely make the argument that Aemon stole Vhagar. Sure, there's no legal doctrine binding an untamed dragon to another person, but to tame Vhagar, who is promised to be passed down to Laena's children on her funeral, is pretty distasteful, especially since other dragons were available to be tamed. I understand that Aemon was being bullied, but that's not even the Black's fault since Aegon was the main one driving it. This one single event heavily drove the wedge between the Blacks and the Greens, and it was completely unjustified and unnecessary. Now, I'm not saying Laena's kids were justified in starting a fight after the fact, but the initial taming of the dragon is pretty bad. People complain about how Rhaenyra had sex with Daemon during the wedding, and rightfully so, but Aemon is just fine for taming a dragon that Laena promised to her kids during the night of her funeral? Like, he couldn't at least just ask? That just doesn't sit right with me. Another reason is Daemon, and I'm not saying that Daemon's character is morally good or anything like that, but it's undeniable that Daemon is one of the most iconic characters in the show. There's going to be a substantial amount of people who tune in just to watch Daemon. Not to mention that Daemon is just interesting as a character. The whole morally gray thing is kind of tired at this point, but it is true that Daemon has some positive traits despite all the bad that he's done. For example, he still defends Viserys when Corlys criticizes him, and he cuts through bullshit. He calls Viserys weak, just straight up.
You're weak, Viserys.
It's likely one of the reasons that Otto doesn't like him. Otto is this subtle guy who likes to politic with soft power, while Daemon is very brash and vocal about what he wants / think about a situation. Not to mention that he's just cool. Daemon just does what he wants, and he's respected in the world that he's placed in. We're not just told that Daemon is cool, he just gives off that vibe. The last reason I'll give for being Team Black is Alicent and Cole's relationship. It was leaked that Cole and Alicent were having sex at the start of season 2. If this is the case, then it makes them major hypocrites. Alicent's whole thing was that she has a duty towards the realm, and Rhaenyra ignores her duty by sleeping around. Cole is the exact same, where he criticizes Rhaenyra for sleeping around as well. So for these two to be sleeping with each other is pretty absurd and hypocritical. Not only does this mean Cole is breaking his vows again, but it makes it possible that they can have bastards, which is very problematic if you've been following this show for any amount of time. Now let's switch over and talk about why it might be a good idea to be Team Green. While the show can be seen as a frame for feminism and whatnot, the issue is that Rhae doesn't care about female equality at all. She only really cares about her birthright. If she could be queen by fucking over all the other women in Westeros, she may very well turn to that as an option. This creates a dilemma where you have to ask yourself if Rhae is actually a compelling character or not. If Rey wasn't the main character of the show, would people care about her? I understand that if Rey wasn't a main character, then she wouldn't have as many scenes, but if the show was framed through Alicent's POV, I think more people would dislike Rey. Someone on this side could easily make the argument that Rey is wrong for bringing bastards into the world. While the dislike of bastards is mistaken, knowingly bringing them into a world where you know they will be rejected can definitely be seen as wrong and immature to do at the very least. And again, this is the paradox with Rhaenyra. Her cause seems valid and morally good, but her actions don't align with morality or even what her cause seems to represent. Maybe the showrunners didn't want to go with this angle for Rhaenyra being this pro-woman character, and that would actually make a lot of sense. But many people in the Black fandom have went with that, and therefore the paradox manifests itself in this way. This also leads into the idea that the Greens have the right claim. It is precedent for the firstborn male to inherit the Iron Throne, and Alicent did misinterpret Viserys' dying words as confirmation that he wanted to name Aegon heir.
The prince.
Prince Aegon.
To unite the realm against the cold and the dark.
Now, personally, I think this is bad writing because it gives the Greens a last-second excuse to take the throne from Rhaenyra when, like the night before at the dinner, Alicent and Rey were getting along like completely fine. But it is a justification nonetheless. When you think of it in terms of small folk, the Greens might be the best for the realm as well. Rey kills a random guy to save Laenor, and Rhaenys kills probably hundreds of people when she escapes the dragon pit. Rhaenyra also had firstborn bastards alongside pureblood Targaryens, which is kind of axing for rebellions and uprisings. Not to mention that said multiple times that Rhaenyra is a woman, and that if she rules, then the realm will tear itself apart. While again, the sexism is unjustified, in the short term at least, it seems pretty bad for the average person if Rhaenyra ascends the Iron Throne. Commoners would likely get swept up into multiple conflicts and disputes regarding whether she should rule or not. If we broaden the scope, then we can also make the argument that the Greens overall have more cool characters. The Blacks have Daemon, but Greens have Aemon. Those two get talked about enough, and I have videos on them, so check those out after this. But I think Alicent and Otto are pretty compelling. Alicent and Otto have a very complex relationship with each other, which enhances the characters individually. For instance, Otto pushes Alicent towards a life of duty. It's Alicent's duty to be loyal to Viserys, so that ultimately the Hightowers can strengthen their family line. This in turn is what leads Alicent to despise Rhaenyra for denying her duties as princess. On the other hand, Otto is great at using politics to get what he wants. Alicent isn't like this. She uses politics and manipulation for things that she thinks are necessary. There's also lines that she simply just won't cross. Alicent genuinely is a victim within the context of this show. She's a victim of the system she lives in, which not only forces her to essentially be a slave for her husband, but also emotionally manipulates her into thinking that being a slave is the right thing to do. Otto reinforces these ideas as women are mainly used as vehicles to increase the house's political power. On the other side of Team Green is Aegon. Aegon is completely unlikable in season 1. He genuinely has no redeemable traits whatsoever. I cannot think of one good trait Aegon had in season 1, but I have a hunch that he might be a lot better in this season. Him and Aemon are going to be great villains that pair off of each other, and I think that's the smartest direction to take these characters to at this point. I think Aegon's going to be someone that we love to hate, but at the same time, he's going to choose scenery and essentially become a new character. We see in season 2 trailers that Aegon seems much more confident and willing to confront conflict, which is opposed to how he ran away from responsibility in the first season. And overall, I think this will lead to a more heavy focus for Team Green in season 2. You guys have to understand that like half of the Team Green members didn't even exist until halfway through season 1. Aemon, Helena, and Aegon either weren't born yet or they were kids for most of last season, so developing them was going to be very difficult. So now in season 2, all the Team Green members are fully fledged out. This should mean that they're going to get a lot more focus, and there's going to be more Team Green members as the show progresses, specifically Daeron, which is the youngest sibling out of all the Team Green kids. Now, overall, I think both sides are going to be pretty entertaining and viable to root for. And I'll give my opinion on which side I'm on in another video, and eventually when season 2 comes out. But what do you guys think? Comment which side